extension educator in energy and environmental stewardship. In addition to the work that Peggy does at Russell Woods Forest Preserve, her work is especially close to our hearts at the Elwood House Museum because their site, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're sort of caretakers for the Miller Cabin as well, which is where our own Harriet Miller Elwood was born and grew up in the early to mid 1800s. And also close to my heart because I was part of her Master Naturalist group at the beginning of last year.
I'm having a very difficult time hearing you since you started recording.
Oh.
Yeah.
I can hear you though.
Okay. Maybe I need to speak a little louder and slower. So yeah, I was part of her Master Naturalist group in the beginning of 2 years ago. So I am glad to see a lot of fellow Master Naturalists here. So Peggy, thank you for joining us.
Sure. If your volume may have changed too, you can check your audios, and
Okay.
I can talk for a little bit because I could hear Audrey. So checking on that, give you a minute to kind of do a sound check. This program, they gave me an awful broad, like past and present. I think we started mammals, but that was just out of the kindness of Audrey's heart, and then animals. So the program today is at the end of the year. I work for Extension, which is like the PowerPoint king and queen of the world. And so it is a PowerPoint, but it's only because that guides the conversation. This can be a speaking engagement. You can ask Sally or anybody that knows me. I can talk all day. You're more than welcome to ask me a question or sit and listen. It is very eclectic. I'm going to warn you now because my thoughts were kind of all over the board. And then I was talking via email with Audrey, and there's teachers on board. So I rearranged so that if there's the first part is more of classroom ability, that they can pull that out. So forgive the eclecticness, but remember who I am. And those who don't know me, bless you for being here. So the idea of past and present, one of the things I talk about a lot, and the Master Naturalists have heard this, when I think of something or when I talk about something, I really need to think about foundationally where it's from. And so you're going to see a lot of that coming from where I'm starting to where I'm going. And I'm going to go way the heck back, because I think when you get the fact that we're really a tiny blip on the historical timeline, right? I love how historians can make us interested. You know, Audrey and Michelle can take us and make us interested in something that isn't ours. Ours is the now. And if you think about it, I was thinking about this morning, like about my dad when he'd start saying, when I was a kid, and you just wanted to like beat your head on the table because you knew it was going to be this, so what, you know, I didn't appreciate it then. But now as I tell people about what's happened in my lifetime, I realize the reason we do that, we know we are the past of the future present. We know we're that timeline for those people. So when my son Mitch gets older, he's going to say, oh, I remember when my mom did such and such, or my mom used to hang clothes on the line. How embarrassing is that, right? It's that we recognize, they don't yet, that they are the past of the future present. And that helps build our timelines. And we aren't grateful maybe for that when we're younger, when we start to hear that. So as we go into the nature piece of this, think about, especially in these most unusual times, I'm excited because nature is bringing people closer and closer and closer together because we're focusing on what isn't reacting or reactive. Nature doesn't have a clue what's going on. Every day the squirrels are eating like, man, they're around a lot, right? Bird feeders getting filled way more regularly at my house. They don't know. And I think that helps us. So when you get into a dire moment, and with these holidays coming up, take a breath, look out a window and pick one thing, whether it's a leaf on the ground, a tree with buds on it, a rabbit, a squirrel, the owls. I'm hearing great horned owls in my yard every night now. They're courting and they're falling in love, I can tell, right? And I can focus on that the world is still going. Everything's the same. We just have these huge expectations right now that aren't being met because we're used to having them. And nature is connected. It doesn't matter if you're the paper boy, the garbage collector, an attorney, a doctor. when it snows the first time, everybody's looking out the window. Me personally, I know there's not everybody on here. I love snow. I love the fact of snow days. And we're connected to that. And my son Mitch is teaching. His first year of teaching high school is virtual. And I said to him, and when it snowed last week, I'm like, oh, there's not going to be snow days this year because it's virtual. He goes, Mom, there's never going to be snow days again. I'm like, that's wrong, right? That's wrong, because that's what draws us together, and that's what makes us hopeful, and that's what makes us know we're all connected. All right. I warned you, right? So think about this from Aldo Leopold. And I think about this all the time. There are two things that interest me. And he said this, I believe this. This is how I look at it. The relationship of people to each other and the relation of people to the land. That is so critical right now. And how we're responding and how we're looking and finally seeing again and slowing down. So I'm going to take you on a little trip. And this would help our teachers in the bunch, right? We're going to take a way back. They said past. Audrey, you didn't say how far past. So you didn't give me a back. So here we go. We're going to do a little bit of catch up, because the soil under your feet right now is the present, but it's really the past of the future present. So a quick timeline for you today. So we need to understand our history. Why are we prairie? And we find thick layers of sand and limestone. There's coal with whole trees. Illinois, if you can picture it from the side, say you're looking from Iowa, don't go to Iowa. They're not doing a good job with the math thing, but so you're looking from Iowa and you're looking at it straight in, and there's this huge dip through central Illinois and down into southern Illinois, and it's full of coal. And coal is organic matter, right? It's the trees that lived and died, and we're going to get to that. But there's whole trees in there. There's whole trees down in there. There are fossils of camels and sand. Well, that would be cool, wouldn't it? We're all excited about the bison. I say we build a big warm Morton building and bring back the camels. There's 3-foot dragonfly fossils in the state of Illinois, you guys, down in the geology, down in the rocks. The story says we had 3-foot wide dragonflies. We are only prairie in the now. So I did this, this little visual. I don't do water. I don't love water. Water's not my thing. Land, sand, soil, anything is my thing. 540 million to 325 million years ago, in that window, we were covered by a shallow, warm ocean. I don't know what shallow means, because I don't even like to take baths. I like showers, no drowning, it's safer. But they know it was warm because of the limestone that we look at, that's full of those creatures with those exoskeletons and the shells, and they're all that limestone from all those shelled animals.
You might be interested in this. Is Peggy Doty's talk.
I am interested. And the limestone is created by all the crushed shells. And the ones that didn't get crushed are the fossils that we have found since we were tiny children, that we go, oh my gosh, here's a perfect fossil, right? And that was millions of years of oceanic. Now this next picture, forgive me, but I couldn't find one, so I colored one for you out of a curriculum I have. So it's no wonder Louisiana floods, you guys, they're way below sea level, right? But if you look at where Illinois is on this, I'm pointing to my screen because people who know me know I talk with my hands. Look where the paleo equator was. You know what that means? That means Illinois used to be where Brazil is right now. We weren't the prairie state yet. We were nothing of what we know yet. We were full of little creatures living and dying in the water, creating all the limestone that built up, and the part that sank through the middle of Illinois is buried. But then there's Galena, the unmoved portion that didn't sink. Not only did they not get hit by glaciers, they didn't sink in the suction of the Illinois basin. So we started out all wet and gooey. Now the Appalachian Mountains started to come up, right? So the sand from the oceans and the small marine life created all that. And then the ocean started to fill up because we had the mountains, the Appalachians. The Appalachian Mountains weren't just short, stubby mountains all along. They were bigger than the Rocky Mountains. They're 480 million years old. So these mountains are erupting, and so they're eroding over time. And all that sand and silt started mixing with water. Anybody knows if you mix dirt and water, you're going to get mud. And we started creating these and getting these delta swamps. Oh, now we're getting to be closer to being a prairie and all the animals that would come with it. So now We have enough dirt to have trees with knees because there's a lot of water. The cypress trees grew so that they could get oxygen from roots that were not submerged in that completely deoxygenated soil. There's no oxygen in that soil. But the great forest that created our coal lived and died for millions of years. And that organic matter, if you're any of my children, you would say organic matter, because that's how we remember it, lived and died and made it and compacted it and continued on until we had so much soil, there were only paths for the rivers. And now we have land, and now we have rivers. And so we're still coming millions of years to the present. This was the present, but it is now our past, and it's what built Illinois, and it built the United States, because eventually the very young toddler mountains that we know so well, they're only 55 million years old. The Rocky Mountain range popped up. It all got wedged up and shoved. I don't know if the earth ate Taco Bell or what, but it got sick and irped a big old mountain range. It's weird to think of that in time, the Rockies are going to be stubby like the Appalachians, because they're starting out even shorter than the Appalachians did. So here's the problem though, with the Rockies in the way, not a problem. It's what helped create the prairie. The jet stream, you guys, the jet stream goes from California and goes east, right? So when those Rocky Mountains popped up, this is what we look like now. Today, we've rolled up high above the equator. We've broken apart. We've irped up some mountains. We are sitting in that bright green band under the, right there by the Great Lakes. But the Rockies, you can see the dryness. And Nebraska, just on the other side, okay, now you have that jet stream getting blocked by all that water we used to get that kept us into those swampy 3-foot wide dragonfly era. Can I point out too that when we see a dragonfly that's pretty big, I know my master naturalist, I know Julia would get excited and go running after it to see it. Those dragonflies that we see that are 4 inches wide are massive today. Those dragonflies are predators. They eat meat. Can you imagine a 3-foot wide flying predator? I would be uncomfortable. Just saying. Just saying. So this is all changing because now we have a moisture issue. We have these soils. Our soils are probably very similar to Nebraska, except of a moisture. So now we're getting moisture because they finally gain moisture. The atmosphere gains moisture coming out of Canada once it gets closer into Iowa, and we get backwash, back weather from the Great Lakes. And then when there's a hurricane, we get this, forgive me for, I don't know a better term, but an enema of water straight up through the middle of the country. We thrive with a mix of our soil type and our water, and we grow tall grass. We grow corn. Corn is a tall grass. Plants that are round, stalk, round like that are grasses. We grow tall grass, you guys. We eat grass seed every summer and think it's wonderful. Grass seed with butter and salt and pepper. I'm a believer that anything I have to add butter to probably isn't something I truly like. I just use it as a transfer of butter to my face. Now, you have this. So that's why Nebraska is known for wheat. That's a short grass. It requires less water, same types of soils, less water. It's not getting as much water until it gets farther over toward us. Then, as we dried up, we've layered in, only then did we start to become this prairie state. We had a lot more trees before we as settlers came, but not a ton. We never had lots and lots of trees. We were in the middle of succession, with people. Now, if we go back just to think about this a little bit, not back, going forward, this is what we look like today, but this next slide, we're going to step back on this hair, all right? In the Ice Age, we think about it, it's 1.8 million to 13,000 years ago, all right? We've got mountains in place. We have, things going on, repeated cold over and over with warm spells, animals that moved in and out of these warm spells until about 130,000 years ago. And we were covered in ice, right? So now we're covering and having this ice and this glaciation going on. The glaciers come in, they slowly melt back out, new little animals come in, the new ice comes again, they're like, whoa, too cold, going back, So this goes on, and that's why we need those fossils and those geologists and those anthropologists to find out what the heck was going on and when. I would love a job where I could say, somewhere between 100, 130,000 years ago. What a great, you can't be wrong, really. I mean, who's going to say you're completely wrong, right? So as it closed, the ice age, we had a mass extinction due to climate change. So we've been here before. We're just on the best part of the ride right now, you guys. You know, this ebbs and flows all the time. We're gonna always see this, but we are the future, and this was our past when it was being created. Something to think about. So they wanted me to talk about animals, past and present. I'm gonna go way back, but these are the ones we lost. And I couldn't find good photos I'm allowed to use, and I didn't call the museum in Springfield soon enough, but I've got some comparables and a few others to coming up. Jefferson's ground sloth. You guys, this was not just a sloth. This thing was massive and browsed off of trees, kind of like a giraffe. Yeah, pretty big. Giant beavers, humongous. They were the size of black bears. Yeah, I don't want to ever have a beaver the size of a black bear. They're doing so much work down here at Russell Woods right now. If they were the size of black bear, the lowland forest would be gone already. A flat-headed peccary is similar to our peccaries today. It's a furry pig. It's got more fur on it. We lost the Harlan's muskox, but we did keep our current muskox. The muskoxens we have today in the Arctic that used to be here as things changed and we got warmer, they are still the one, but we did lose the Harlan's. It is extinct. Woolly mammoth and stag moose, which is a combination, literally looks like an elk with twisted up moose antlers, and the American mastodon. I have a mastodon bone here found in DeKalb County. I think NIU has some of it, Kish has some of it. It was found in a farm field. I had somebody look at it and they said, this isn't fossilized, this is preserved. It's literally bone. And I leave it out for every child on the planet to touch. And I can guarantee you in my lifetime, it is not going to matter. So don't get mad at me, history people. Audrey's going, you let people touch it. Got to touch something, right? I know that they're not going to be able to harm this thing. It's rock hard, right? So here's a couple of comparables just to think about. So I couldn't find a peccary picture that I could use legally, except this lazy one, the furry one here at the top. He's just lounging out. They're not big, and they're about the same size as they were. I'm sure they were low on the food chain for some of the bigger meat eaters. That's a muskox of today. The Harlan's was smaller, and actually they said kind of more rectangular and squattier than the one muskox we have today up north. And look at the giant beaver comparison. Can you imagine? I wouldn't even want to go hiking. Like, I go hiking to look for the beaver. I would not, because now you're talking about beaver that are like small black bears, but they eat plants. So the demolition of any kind of large material would have been huge. So I put these two together because basically I couldn't use a picture. I couldn't get one from the museum in time. But if you twist those moose antlers wacky backwards, like up and back, and put it on that elk, that's exactly what a stag moose looked like. They were gigantic though. Everything was huge. It seemed like, except for just a random few things. So here's a picture on the top left from Life Science, the giant sloth, and the skulls they have found, literally the nasal opening is like the size of a coffee mug you could put in there. So they definitely must have had some incredible sense of smell to find the trees they wanted to reach up or plants that they wanted to reach up. We had bison, Joe Richardson, that were huge compared to the bison we have today, and they had more of a Texas Longhorn style horn. Otherwise they looked the same, but they were even bigger. And Joe has taken me out on the chusas up close and too personal for the bison, and I couldn't believe their size. I can't imagine running into something like this. And the amount of browsing these animals had to do, but they weren't competing. They had all the land. It wasn't covered in anything human. We had ponies. We had ponies until about 13,000 years ago, and thank goodness the Spaniards brought them back, or we wouldn't have them today. We wouldn't have horses, but they brought them back in the 1500s. The armadillo, that happens to be a 9-banded. You'll hear about 3-banded armadillos and 9-banded armadillos. It's those stretchy bands so that they can curl. They're literally like elastic. That's when they call them banded, how many of those they have. The armadillos would come in and out during the warm spells between the glaciers, and they figured that out by the fossils layered in between. So they were like, yay, we're in, oh, we're out, and they'd go south. Interestingly enough, we now have armadillos in Illinois, and last I checked, which was probably 2 years ago, they have already made it all the way up to Peoria County, up by Peoria proper. So they're coming back in. we're in the best part of the ride, you guys, right? So they're like, oh, we can go back. You know, these are ancestors of the same armadillo that would have been here during the warm-ups. So who survived but extirpated? One thing I would ask for anyone on the call when you talk to small children, it's eco-terrorism, especially right now. Whenever I talk to about third grade is when I talk to kids and I'll say, what happened to the black bear? Where did they go? Oh, and a third grader, oh, we killed them all. They include themselves. We killed them all. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm thinking the worst thing you did was not turn off the light when you left the bathroom today. They take this human responsibility on from what they're hearing and seeing, right? So I try really hard to say, no, I don't think we did it all. So really what was happening, some of these animals that we're going to look at that survived, once, you know, we tend to say when settlers came, things were happening before that. Our trees, we are having more succession. The prairie fires, you know, up to a river, we're keeping those trees down. These animals that left need contiguous forests. We were lucky to have what we had at the time. And we as humans, yes, we harvested trees. We are not a part of nature. I get a little frustrated with that phrase. We are nature. We are a species that has the same needs and drive to reproduce and sustain ourselves. So what did we do? We came in, saw this wonderful place and went, let's build a house. Okay, it wasn't the size of a squirrel nest, but it wasn't much bigger initially. We aren't wrong for wanting to succeed. We just now have to use the brain we were given to help balance what we've been doing needs to change. Because as people will say, extinction is normal. Well, it is, but it's kind of going a little fast right now, right? We need to back the train a little bit. And quite frankly, the current situation is helping us slow down that train. So who survived but extirpated? Who walked away? By pressure. The Native Americans were hunting beaver and bear and elk. I will say the beavers used to be diurnal, all out during the day, but as tiny as their brains are, they, you know, natural selection helped them change to being nocturnal where they were less susceptible to being captured. So the pressures were ours and Native Americans for some of these animals. And we put those pressures on, and natural selection's job is to help work on that to sustain numbers. So we had elk, we had bear, both require forested areas. We had wolves, we had caribou, we had bison, all succeeded and lasted through into our most recent past. The caribou were in northern Illinois and central. They found fossils in central. Their bones are really delicate, so all they're found were jaw bones, antlers, the things that rodents had took longer to chew. Rodents get their calcium from antlers and bones. So the fact we had caribou is kind of cool. And then these guys were included in those that left in the 1800s. Who caused habitat changes and hunting pressures? It wasn't just us as humans. There was a change happening, and the biodiversity is different. Yes, we need to slow down how we're affecting our environment, but we cannot be scaring our children into thinking they failed when they're only in third grade. We have to be careful that we present ourselves with, we too developed a way to sustain ourselves. And we can talk about those histories. I was thinking about what if it came up in something else, the Gettysburg, in the Civil War, the big battle at Gettysburg, at any moment, a full flight of passenger pigeons could have gone over, and they say it sounded like thunder coming because there were just thousands of them in flocks. And I'm sure that somebody was saying, yeah, that has to be edible, right? There's so many. And that's what happened. We harvested them. We didn't know. We didn't purposely say, let's eat squab until they're gone, right? We harvested them to make an income, to do business, it's all the same things. We are a species. We just have the brain that we need to, do a better job at the things that we, are capable of doing. So think about when the European settlers came. There just wasn't that much impact. We're picturing our kids, when we say people came, they picture their city, they picture their town. They don't picture this. I did point out to some child, I'm like, where do you think the bathroom is? And they were looking at the roof line and looking around. I said, anywhere you want it to be. I don't know. The historians would have to tell us where the privies would end up. But the European settlers came, and we, just like any other species of nature, went on to survive. We utilized animals, we utilized nature. We had a lot more work to do. We had a lot more pressures on us to survive, especially in the winters. We had to adapt. We had to learn, right, to pelt animals for ourselves and find people that might want to trade or buy them to you didn't this is like COVID today, but nobody had a clue that was like isolated, right? They were trying to figure out how to sustain themselves and grow into community. So something to think about. And if I'm saying anything non-historically true, Audrey and Michelle get to correct me anytime they want. So I wanted to throw this in here before we move on to the Ice Age animals that we still find today, because we have to remember, just like any other animal, the food chain works in schools because children love the fact that things eat other things. That's kind of creepy, but that's what they love. Like, oh yeah, the mouse eats the grasshopper, snake eats the mouse, the hawk eats the snake. And every child I talk to, 3rd, 4th grade, and then the people eat the hawks. That's totally illegal. Don't do that, right? That's not okay. But what is important, and they don't grasp it because they're so excited about things eating each other, is the energy. You guys, we're just a pile of energy. We are borrowed energy. And 5th grade and older, I tell them, I can prove to you your borrowed energy with 2 words. Stop eating. We borrow energy every day. Some of us are borrowing more than usual because I'm cooking all my Christmas treats 1 week at a time ahead, so I'm not eating them all at the end of the month. So my energy intake's a little high right now. But what I love about this diagram is it shows you how every animal is consuming, or in the case of plants, they're autotrophs, they're making their own food. They're only giving up 1/10 of themselves to the food chain. It's their whole job is to grow to feed the food chain. The next animal, the grasshopper, he's using all that food. He's using 90% of it to grow and become and breed and sustain himself, and only hands the mouse 10%. Hence, the mouse has to keep eating to continue to borrow the energy from the sun. The only way we live is to get the sun. And the only way we can get the sun, you can't walk outside and open your mouth. That would be weird. And it'd be great on a sunny day, and we'd panic on cloudy days, right? We'd get really trim in the winter though. But it's the energy we pass. And when that energy decays and goes away, it starts over in the soil. It never leaves the planet. This energy just keeps going and passing through. We are no different, but we hold ourselves quite high. And when we can kind of go back to being level with nature and realizing that we are the brains of this whole thing, I think it'll be an interesting eye opener for a bigger number of people. Maybe not those on the call. Maybe those on the call get it all already. Ice Age animals that you still find. Yep, these guys were all there. We had deer in the 1800s, but the elk early 1800s, but the elk kept them in check because somebody said, well, why did the wolves leave? I said, the lunchbox left. The elk are gone. And there were some white-tailed deer here, but they weren't in high number. And if you're going to run yourself to death to try to catch your meal, wouldn't you want to catch something the size of an elk versus the size of a white-tailed deer anyway? So when some of these animals extirpated, the food was going. So the food chain moved. We don't have large predators permanently in Illinois. We have a slide later to talk about just briefly that. But these guys made it, and they were and are still here. And animals as an asset. I put this in here because, you look at early history, people were hunting because they needed the pelts to stay warm. For the master naturalists on the call, I just did a blog on the beaver moon. We have a new master naturalist blog. And the point being is, we had the Native Americans started it and handed it to European settlers. The moons represented what you should be working on. It wasn't an email, right? It was the moon. It's like, this was the beaver moon in the Algonquin tribes from Lake Superior all the way east. And the beaver moon meant the beaver's pelts were thick enough to provide warmth for your body and your family's body, and they were worth more in trade. So pelts and food initially for Native Americans, and then the settlers, and then food for the table. And as things got better and things were easier, we established communities, which we had more things provided. We had things coming to us. Now we're still sustaining ourselves as settlers with the food. The black bears, by the way, did become quite an asset for edibility and bigger pelts. So they were like, yeah, we don't need this. We didn't make them go extinct. They natural selection made them realize they needed to move on. So we got our food for the table. We had extra pelts for trade, not just for ourselves. And then I was thinking about it in my lifetime. I'm going to be 56. And that's just, okay, it's not that many years in the picture of what we've been talking about. But in my lifetime, my family was still hunting for food for the table and to sell pelts as extra income. My brother, I will just say that he's Beaver. His name is Paul, but he was, because I'm very young in my family, he decided he wanted to be Beaver from Leave It to Beaver. So he still signs his notes to me, love Beav. So if I say Beaver would leave for school with his 22 unloaded, the rounds, the rounds in his pocket, along with all his buddies. They'd get to school. We lived in Mount Morris. They'd get to school and they'd hang up their coat, lean their 22s right next to their coat, go to school all day. And then on the way out the door, they would all decide which part of the tracks each other were going to hunt rabbits during rabbit season. And they'd hunt rabbit. 2 days later, we'd have rabbit for dinner. He helped sustain our grocery budget. That's in my lifetime. And I remember that. And I remember one time we had domestic rabbit. Clearly, we had different foods, squirrel. And I remember telling someone that I like domestic rabbit, they must eat better food because I knew the flavor difference between domestic and wild rabbit. Food to ease the food budget, and it was a natural activity next. Right now, we didn't have to hunt for our food, but it was nostalgic. So into my lifetime, I have family that still hunts deer, and they do eat it, they do process it, but they don't have to. Now, it's really more sport first, food second, if they're being responsible in their harvest. My first degree is in wildlife management. I studied mammals in the early 80s. I studied fur-bearing mammals as a way to learn how to manage mammal populations to be sustainable while people were hunting them to eat and sell pelts to have a second income for their family. That's not even on the table. Pelts aren't even worth that much anymore. And that's in my short lifetime. So I thought about, how we've come such a long way and such a different perspective. So some of our urban neighbors that have since come into the picture, moved in, and please remember that when somebody complains about geese or raccoons or coyotes, these animals are everything we've created them to be. We've opened up our North American continent. We've made it industrial and then agricultural. With agriculture comes a beautiful food chain, starting with rodents. Plants are already there. And so we get a few extra friends. So these are our newest urban buddies. I love it. During COVID, I've had more phone calls of people working at home said, I just had a coyote go through my yard. I'm like, yeah, he goes through there every day, but you're at work. But I live in DeKalb. I'm like, I know. It's just what happens when you're not there. Coyotes are diurnal. They're daytime folks. But people think when we see something we don't understand that's out during the day, we think that they're broken or sick. They're smart. They're very, very adaptable. These are two of the most adaptable animals we have, and they're in competition. They're open area animals. They can go into the forest. They're not going to dissolve. But these guys, and they're not out to get your garbage. We create so much garbage. We create the bottom of the food chain. We have rodents. We have mice and chipmunks and shrews and voles galore between agriculture and garbage. These guys don't want your garbage. They don't even like our carbohydrates. And our carbohydrates destroy the enamel on their teeth, right? They want the animals that are coming to your food chain. And we've created that. And now we blame them for showing up. It's right up there with, and forgive me, there's probably people on this call that feed the birds and don't want squirrels to eat. I have squirrels at my feeder. They're very fat. But here's the thing. In the current situation of where we are in the big picture, how is it that we should, how do we defend that when we set a beautiful table of food that's rich in health and free, and then we decide who sits at the table with us? And I don't think we can do that anymore, because I think that stems from a whole bunch of other stuff we can't talk about today. But we need to be if we're going to feed, let her rip, right? If we have to allow the food chain to happen. I know one time my grandmother was so upset because a hawk took her cardinal from her yard, right? I said, Grandma, they just taste like chicken like any other bird. They don't know the difference, and coyotes don't know we care. They don't know that none of these animals are thinking about us. They're trying to survive and do what all of us do, which is sustain ourselves. These guys are less urban, but I'm getting a lot of, I don't get calls on the gray foxes because nobody sees them. They're too good and they're about the size of a house cat. And also gray foxes, the guy on the right, they climb trees. They hunt birds and bird eggs because they don't compete with two other canines, the other two. And I'm getting a lot more bobcat calls because they're being looked for now, for one. And just as a fun thing, little trivia, you see that bobcat tail, how it's black on top, but it's white on the bottom? If you ever see a picture like that, and somebody says, ooh, it has to be a lynx. That's not a lynx, it's a bobcat. And the one identifier, if it's a lynx, the entire tip of the tail is black top and bottom, just for fun, just something to add. You never know, you might win a radio contest knowing that information. But that's a very furry, it looks big, but it's just a lot of winter fur, has the tufts like a lynx, not quite as long. That's a very furry bobcat. I asked the guy doing the research down at Western, bobcats average 16 pounds. I'm like, they look a lot heavier. And he goes, yeah, they're just really tall. And the other cool, interesting factoid, when I was talking to him, I was the only one paying attention because it was all data and wildlife. Whenever there's a hog confinement and water, they're finding bobcat. And sure enough, within a couple months after hearing that presentation, I had a call from here in DeKalb County in Ellen Oaks, which is off 23 and Baseline. And I drove down, saw where they were. And if you keep going on Baseline, what do you get to? The hog confinements. And there was 2 bobcat young in somebody's driveway. So that was pretty interesting. So they're not moving in to like secretly take over. They just, they're just like us. They're taking advantage of a situation. And just to make sure we're all under the same information, the large predators that come in and out are basically especially the cougar population up north is really getting bigger because there's a lot of cougar preservation groups. And there's not really perfect hunting rules. So we get a lot of adults taken, but a lot of the youngsters are moving about. Usually about 2 years old, they get kicked out. And every cougar we've had, except one in the far south, down in Randolph County, have all come out of the Black Hills of the Dakotas. So there's so many, they need bigger spaces. They can't live in Illinois for long. Only 14% of our state can even hold a small wolf pack, let alone a cougar whose minimal home range is 70 square miles. So they're coming in and out. We're going to keep seeing them, especially black bear. I think we're going to see more of that because of the unglaciated corners, perfect. And then they're wandering out of that and here, but they go back because male black bears will go about 100 miles away from their mom when their mom tells them to go. But the females only go about 10 miles from their mom. So the boys go about 100 miles and then realize there's no girlfriends there. And then they go back. So that's going to be a very slow ebb and flow into Illinois. And then they can't sustain themselves. They don't want to live in a cornfield. I know Bruno the black bear came through and went, I think there's a lot more to that story yet. I'm still trying to get the inside scoop. That is not normal behavior of an adult black bear. I think he was taken and probably he was a naughty bear and put way up in Wisconsin somewhere, and he was determined to find his way home. But I've yet to hear what this real story is about Bruno the black bear. So I threw in a slide. I just wanted to talk about, when you look at nature, one of the things that I think about, I had a massive oak tree out here, just massive. And years ago, somebody called me on a weekend, one of my staff, and they said, she's in the water. And I said, who? He said, Grandmother Oak fell into the water last night with all the rain. I said, no, she didn't. She's never going to fall in the water. And she did. I know Julia's probably incidentally seen her to the right of our steps going down into the river. I went and looked at her the other day. She's decaying quite a bit. And I went down there and it was summer and the mosquitoes were just horrible. And I got to 279 rings and still had a long way to go. And it made me realize our history is being watched. The energy from our earth up through our plants and animals is contiguous. And these things out here that we look at every day are recording that history, whether it's climate change or, or if it's droughts and really wet years, the recordings are happening. And we don't give them credit for that, and we don't look to that. So one of the things that I got as a gift recently was a book called The Lost Spells. Don't get excited. But it was from the authors of The Lost Words, where people, the Oxford Dictionary decided there were words that kids weren't going to need anymore. They took out words like dandelion. You know, they're removing things that meant something in our past, which at that time was our present, and it is our, you know, now it's our history. And so now they've written a book of really cool called The Lost Spells. I don't know if you can see it. And it was a gift for me recently. And in near closing here, I just want to read this oak poem to you. People that know me are like, oh, there, she fit a poem in there. So, but I want you to think about that as you think about the forest preserves and the places, and when we lose a tree, that it does matter. Okay, so just bear with me, but it's real short, and it's just there's three sections to it that are super short, but I think it's pretty cool. Out on the hill, old oak still stands, stag-headed, fire-struck, bare-crowned, stubbornly holding its ground. Poplar is the whispering tree, rowan is the sheltering tree, willow is the weeping tree, and oak is the waiting tree. 300 years to grow, 300 more to thrive, 300 years to die, 900 years alive. Ancient oak hears with ancient ears, sees with ancient eyes, the snow of another winter, the glow of a new sunrise. Birch is the watching tree, cherry is the giving tree, ash is the burning tree, and oak is the waiting tree. 300 years to grow, 300 more to thrive, 300 years to die, 900 years alive. Knot shows through silver grain through bark, but each fresh spring brings oak green leaves again. Holly is the witching tree, beech is the writing tree, elder is the quickening tree, and oak is the waiting tree. 300 years to grow, 300 more to thrive, 300 years to die, 900 years alive. I just feel like, because it's a history-focused brown bag and that it's all happening naturally, that was just a really great piece to share with you today. And I just really like it. And we're not different when it comes to nature. You know, we all have this innate connection to the planet, no matter if you're a gardener, naturalist, paperboy, judge. If, you know, it's all us, and we're a part of it. This was one of my favorites from Aldo Leopold, like winds and sunsets. Wild things were taken for granted until progress began to do away with them. Now we face the question whether a still higher standard of living is worth its cost in things natural, wild, and free. Something to think about. And this other favorite one I love, because it makes us all equally responsible and equally amazing at what we can do. Acts of creation are ordinarily reserved for gods and poets, but humbler folk may circumvent this restriction if they know how. To plant a pine, for example, one need be neither god nor poet. One need only own a good shovel. This is for all my gardener friends, because they know I'm not a gardener. Whoops. And I want to throw this in. If you don't know Thich Nhat Hanh, he's a Vietnamese monk. And I want you to think about this in the sense of the energy and how we flow as a species in nature from now, because we are the present, but we are the past for the future present. If former lives you were a tree, a rock, a cloud, a rabbit, a deer, all these things are still in you and you can touch them. They belong in your home. Go back and touch these elements and you will see that your Dharma body is huge and your home is vast. All that means is that you are your energy, and your energy comes from your food, and your food comes from the earth, and it keeps rolling through the same thing, and you're all a part of that. And to prove it, I have my proof. This is your one activity, because you're not little kids. I don't have to do activities. But this is your activity. Some of you have done this. Fix your feather. So when I ask people to do this, I ask people to hold up an imaginary feather. Don't do this with preschoolers, those who've heard me say this, because they will not let go of that feather, even though it doesn't exist. You hold up your feather and you fix it. So you're welcome to do that right now. I'm going to give it a second, because some people like to do it before I do it. You're holding a feather, and I'm looking around and I can't believe I don't have a feather. I have all parts and pieces, but not a feather in front of me. And you fix it. And what we tend to do is go like this, right? We do this. There is not a single person who's probably taught you that. You probably picked that up as a 5-year-old off the ground before somebody screamed, don't touch it, you're going to get a disease. They're all host specific to the birds except the avian flu. Don't worry about it, right? You just pick that feather up and fix it. You know that. You know that because your energies have been on this planet since before the Ice Age, and those keep rolling through. We have those innate things inside us. Our history is our current, and our history is the future, right? Last little picture out of my yard, looking out my window one winter. I think he looks so happy no matter what, especially when the snow melts when I can see him. And then finally, it's all changing, and that's okay. We just have to be a little better stewards about the change, right? Because if nothing changed, we wouldn't have butterflies. And that is all I have for you to put you through for your brown bag lunch today. I warned you it was eclectic.
Well, thank you so much, Peggy. If anybody has any questions, now is a good time. We've got about 9 minutes left. So you can either put questions into the chat box, or you can raise your hand, or just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
And it's okay if there aren't questions. If you're just left thinking, that's just perfect too.
Right.
So I had someone that couldn't attend today ask me a question that you kind of touched upon a little bit, but specifically it was about eagles, and are eagles back in DeKalb County, and you know, where do they tend to stay? I mean, usually I'm assuming near water, but could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there are a number of nests now in DeKalb County. And when we first started getting, when the first nest showed up, somebody said, "Oh, I'll show you where it is." I was like, "I don't want to know, because I'm the person that everybody's going to ask, and I don't like to lie." So I just said, "I don't want to know another word. I just want to know they exist." Yeah, bald eagles, as we know, were highly affected by DDT. And one of the things we have to remember, again, with that ecoterror, when I teach kids, we didn't make DDT as humans because we thought it was a great way to wipe out a bunch of, you know, water-related birds. We did it to try to increase our food chain ability for humans, and we made a mistake, right? And we've stopped that. But the bald eagles are returning. Just last Saturday, I took a hike. I came out, I had to work, and I took a walk, and I saw a bald eagle right here in Russell again. I almost hit a tree the first year I saw an eagle in Russell Woods. That was wrong. Don't drive and bird watch. It's a very bad idea. And they are, and the neat thing about eagles is if the tree is holding up, they'll re-nest on the same nest. So once you know where they are, the thing I would ask, we used to, when they were fully endangered species, it's a federal fine. Any bird, anything you do with birds is federal. The state owns every other animal and living thing and makes the decisions for that. So the Illinois Department of Natural Resources make those decisions. But if it's a bird, it's protected by the federal government, especially the national symbol. They get a little excited about that. So you can't harm them, but also you can disturb them if you go looking. If somebody said, "Hey, I'm going to go look at this eagle's nest," maybe tell them to take binoculars, stay back, because you can disrupt that system. And we want to make sure they don't feel like they're being intruded upon. And they will build nests until they're so heavy they tear down trees. They are scavengers before they are hunters. I know we love to see them in the movies with the fish, and the fish looks like it's wiggling. Probably it was floating, and the big wing beats are making it look like it's wiggling. They're really not. They're pretty lazy. I get a lot of calls in the winter. There's a bald eagle eating a deer carcass in a cornfield. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. Well, why would they do that? I'm like, because they're hungry. You know, it's easy, right? They're not gonna, and any bit of flying is burning calories. But yeah, they're really, I'm seeing them above my house in, they're in Sycamore. I've seen them right there south of my house by Blue Heron Creek, and every year I'm seeing now young, you know, they don't get their white head and tail for 4 years, so they're giant youth for 4 years before they get that white head and white tail. Because you brought up the bird thing, it reminded me of, you know, when we were talking about eating and we used to hunt for food to sustain ourselves. My brother Beaver, Paul, my brother Beaver my mom was very sick and passed when I was very young. And in the process of her being sick, he was put in charge of me a lot. I was like 7 years old. And we had moved to this farm and he wanted to go quail hunting, and then that would bring food in, for us. So I had to go with him because mom was ill. And he took me out, you guys, and he put me on a down tree over this little tiny ravine, which in my 7-year-old mind was gigantic. And there was a den, probably old, hole. And he said, sit on this tree. I'm going to go hunt, and don't get down, because whatever's in there, if you get down, it'll eat you. How cruel is that? I laid on that log, and in my mind, it was all day, right? I laid on it like a sloth. I laid it on my back. I almost slipped one time. I swear there were golden eyes in the hole. He came back. He was all jazzed up. He had 2 quail. And I had realized what had happened. I was mad. We go hiking back. We get home, and he puts the quail down. The farm dog, he shot 2 quail with 1 shot, which was a big deal because rounds cost money, right? The dog looked at it, took 1 quail, and swallowed it whole. I was like, yes. So that just, I'm sorry, but that reminded me of that story back when we were still gathering food naturally.
Wow. Lloyd has a question in the chat box. How do you feel about the tree that was cut down for Rockefeller Center that had the tiny owl in it?
They're not nesting this time of year. The owl might have been sleeping. And the thing that they haven't even considered is that they hid it on the trip. They took it back where the tree was, but what if it flew in? The little owls are very active at night, and small owls like the bright strips on the road. You'll see screech owls sitting in the center of the road staring at them. And screech owls can hurt you, but between me and the few people on here, pull over, put your blinkers on, and use your foot, push them, something. I don't know what that is. I just saw one yesterday going home that got hit by a car on the side stripe. They very well could have picked up the Rockette, not Rockefeller. They figured out she was a girl that saw it. They could have picked her up on the route, and now they took her all the way back to wherever, the assumption is there that she was still. I don't see an owl staying in the tree with all that racket and the big, down. I see one getting scooped on the road on the way there. That's just my thought.
Linda wants to know about the tree poem about the oak. Who is the author of that one?
The book is authored by Robert McFarlane and Jackie Morris. I'm gonna do my best. And it's all these short, beautiful
Lost Spells.
The Lost Spells. And it's the same authors as The Lost Words. I don't have that book, so you could probably just pop in The Lost Spells. The person that gave it to me, I'm like, spells? What is she doing? So, but just I like to pick books by their artwork, and then when everything works out well for the colors, check out this dual page watercolor.
Oh, how beautiful.
Just for the pictures, this book is worth it. And some of these animals are no longer called what they're called. It's kind of that whole, we've lost, my dad used to tell me, it's spring when the cardinals feed at the same level. Our science is all based on past phenology and what we used to pay attention to. Well, yeah, it turns out I go to college and now I'm paying to study stuff, and I find out that a cardinal male in the spring has to hand the female cardinal food, a seed, and if she accepts it, they are a mated pair for that year. Okay, well, you can't spit it at her down on the ground. You'd have to be at the same level in order for that to make sense. But all of our past saw so much more science without it having to be studied. It was phenology that brought it to us, and then they looked at, oh yeah, that's how those things work.
Thank you.
Yeah, another connection, to think about, Chief Shabana, we've heard all about Chief Shabana, the Husky native. He was such a Husky guy. I just want to know what he ate. Like, what was the food that made him so robust? But he was alive, he died, 1859, I believe. So I think it was 1775 to 1859. Think about him watching the change in the animals and the people, and he was like an oak tree himself, seeing, what was happening. And I think about that too, people that saw these big changes. And then we realize we've all seen big changes, right?
Well, thank you so much, Peggy. That was amazing. Perfect way to end our 2020 lecture series. just for anyone who maybe wasn't there at the beginning or doesn't know already about the lecture series, Brown Bag Lunch Local Lore is a once a month on the first Thursday of each month series that's put on by the Elwood House Museum and the DeKalb County History Center. So if this is your first time joining in on one of our lectures, keep an eye out for our 2021 lineup, which will be coming out in the next month or so, I think. And we'd love to have you back. But thanks again, Peggy. And
Thanks
thanks everyone for attending.
You guys take care and have a lovely winter season.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.